Hi, this is Gary Mansberger on photography. Today we're going to talk about post-processing. Okay, here's an image from Arches National Park. On the left is the raw image directly from the camera, and on the right is the finished image. You can see in this image I have brought back the detail in the sky, the colors in the trees, and the colors in the hill. I then added an Orton layer to it, and then selectively removed it from the dead tree. This has the effect of drawing your eye directly to where I want you to be looking. And here's an image from Burning Man. On the upper left is the raw image from the camera, and the bottom right is the finished image. In this one, there was a lot of structure that was added to hold the airplane into the position, simulating a nose-down crash. From this angle, this structure really distracted a lot in my mind from the picture, and therefore in Photoshop I went in and meticulously removed all of that structure. After that, I finished the post-processing by bringing out the colors in my normal workflow. When I'm ready to make a photograph, I think I quite obviously see in my mind's eye something that's not literally there in the true meaning of the word. I'm interested in something which is built up from within, rather than just extracting from without. Ansel Adams. All digital cameras have a digital sensor. The job of this sensor is to collect as much data from the light coming through the lens. Its job is not, however, to create a beautiful picture. This is done by processing that data. All cameras have a hardware processor built in, but this processor gives the user very little control. Normally maybe something like a vibrance or a scenery setting. Normally they produce a JPEG file with all of the image burnt into that file and the original sensor data all lost. Many cameras today can shoot in a RAW format. The RAW file contains all of the data from the sensor. It's very flat and dull when you look at this image, but it can have hundreds of times more information than a JPEG. Post-processing uses this data to make artful images. Here's an image taken in Yellowstone National Park. The top left image is the raw image from the camera, while the top right is that created by the hardware processor in the camera. The bottom picture is the result of manual post-processing. In this particular image, I've brought out the greens in the trees on the hill, a little more in the sky, a lot of the color in the pond, the turquoise and the fog coming off of the thermal pond. Here's another image from Burning Man. In this one, I exposed purposely for the sky. I wanted the sun not to be burned out and turn out to be just a giant white blob in the sky. However, after post-processing, I was able to bring the details back into the dark foreground, reestablish the colors. I didn't particularly like the bicyclist on the left and that person standing next to the light pole, so I took a few minutes and removed them from the image. As the sky was relatively dull, I decided to add sunbeams to the sun, which sort of adds some interest in the sky. Dodging and burning are steps to take care of mistakes God made in establishing tonal relationships. Ansel Adams. Okay, here's a summary of my workflow. It all begins in the camera to compose and capture the image, and if you do this wrong, none of the rest counts. From the camera, I go to Lightroom and the first thing I do is catalog each image. This allows me later to find a specific image out of thousands in a few seconds. I make a few adjustments in Lightroom and then move on to Photoshop. Now, Lightroom is a complete photo editor, and I highly recommend that all beginners start using Lightroom. However, for me, I do go to Photoshop, and at that point, I normally do some cropping, cleaning things up, and then start using the following plugins. Luminar 2018 is used for adjusting color balance and contrast, and adding many other filters. In one of the earlier examples, I used a sun ray filter, for instance. I used Nike Color Efex Pro Contrast a lot. If you were to use only one filter, this would be the one to use. I also, in Nike, do output sharpening. Then move on to Raya Pro. Raya Pro has the ability to do selective modifications. For instance, I frequently use a highlights warming filter that only warms the highlights and leaves all of the shadow details alone. After that, I often put an Orton filter on the image, which provides sort of a dreamy, soft look, but then I take it one step further, apply a filter or an overlay, and remove the Orton effect from my main subject. Finally, in Raya Pro, I add a light vignette. Then back to Lightroom, minor touch-ups, and JPEG conversions. I normally make 2 JPEG conversions, one very large one for prints. This is often well over 200 megs, and then a small one for presentations like this and for Facebook. Time for another example, this time Bryce Canyon National Park. Top left is the raw image out of the camera. Again, I've exposed for the sky so as not to burn out the sun. However, this leaves the foreground quite dark. The right upper image is a results of camera post-processing, and here you can see the foreground, but the colors have kind of gone away, and you also now see a crowd of people. This is Sunrise Point, and guaranteed every morning at sunrise there's going to be a flock of photographers. The bottom picture is the results of my post-processing. First thing I did was, of course, bring up the light in the foreground and re-establish all of the colors. I did do some blending around the horizon so that I was able to capture all of the sun's glory. Now, the photographer group didn't particularly interest me in the photograph, so I removed them, leaving the picture the way I truly saw it. Here's another Burning Man image. Top left, the raw image. I don't like the bicyclists on the left-hand side. That seems not to really add much to the photograph, so I've removed them. I also cropped the image a little bit to put the actor more at one of the lower third points. After bringing up the colors, the actor was still a little bit on the dark side, so I added a radio exposure filter right over the top of him to bring him more to the foreground. Well, this has been a non-technical screencast for beginners and non-photographers. In the next one, I will be editing an image from start to finish live, no PowerPoint, using all of the apps mentioned in this screencast. It will show every setting and have a downloadable PDF hard copy and the actual file I edited, which you can use for practice. The great photographers in the past did not have the computer tools available today for post-processing, but found ways to do many of the same things in the darkroom. I'll close this now with a photo of Ansel Adams Enlarger. Photographers have been finding ways to post-process their images for over 100 years. Originally, they used little tools that they would put between the photographic paper and the lens to create shadows on the paper to hold back portions of the image. Then they would take large pieces of paper with a hole in it and put that between the lens and the photographic image to add extra light to certain areas. Well, Ansel Adams took it a step further. He actually built a light source for his enlarger that had 36 individual lights. Then via a switch panel, he could turn them off and on, and thus create the same effects right out of the enlarger. I am sure the next step will be the electronic image, and I hope I shall live to see it. I trust that the creative eye will continue to function, whatever technological innovations may develop. Ansel Adams, born February 20, 1902, San Francisco, California, died April 22, 1984, Monterey, California. I have sprinkled quotes from Ansel Adams throughout this screencast. I encourage you to Google him and learn more about this great California photographer. Thank you for listening.